from the 4th Congressional District, Congressman Ron Estes hanging out with us here. Congressman, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Andy.
Hey, good morning. I appreciate you coming in.
Well, It's great to have it, particularly on Good Friday. I mean,
Good Friday.
It's something that Christians throughout the world celebrate. The Easter season, and Good Friday is such a holy day for the Christianity.
It really is. And we were talking about this with historically, I read a story a couple months ago that historically in every society throughout history, as government grew, the number of religious people in society decreased because they looked towards the government for the answer. Then I just read the Gallup study here that said that from the early 1900s to the mid-70s, we had about a 70 to 75% attendance rate for the population at churches. Now we're down to about 50% of the population. So is that a correlation to right at that same time as when we started the Department of Education, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, we started creating this massive bureaucratic state in the government to solve the answers as opposed to let's figure it out ourselves kind of mentality.
Yeah. I mean, your previous caller, Joe, hit it right on the head, is that the folks that want big government, they want to control individuals. And the biggest way to control individuals is make sure that they don't have the freedom to worship and they don't have freedom of press, freedom of speech, ability to be able to communicate amongst themselves as individuals, which was the whole driver for the founding of our country. Was we wanted to make sure that people directed government as opposed to government dictating to the people.
Craziness.
And so it's a huge sea change. And what you've seen throughout history is that all of these countries that have failed predominantly have failed because they left religion behind. And they tried to get more internal. They got, in some degrees, it's human hubris that they thought they're so arrogant that they wanted to control everything, and unfortunately, that's led to failure so many times.
First off, I appreciate you coming in. You have an hour with us, kind of our own town hall. If you want to call in and ask a question, you can at 316-721-8255. We got to start off with the big meat and potatoes of the day, the elephant in the room that came out yesterday and really this last week, and they not sure how to quite comment on this one, but with the Mueller report that has come out, zero collusion. We kind of knew this for a while, but zero collusion, not only under Trump, but his administration, nor anyone in the U.S. actually came out and had been involved in this in any way, shape, or form. I don't know how the media is going to report this one.
Oh, they're not going to report it because it doesn't fit the false story they've been telling for the last 2 years. I mean, the people that were so strong advocates of Hillary Clinton and just couldn't give up the fact that President Trump beat her in the election, which fair and square. I mean, that's the way we do elections in America. Where one side wins, one side loses, and they govern for the next 4 years, and then you have another election. And so they built up this false story that there must have been collusion. And, the Mueller report very emphatically puts out that there was no evidence of collusion, which is a strong statement from a prosecuting standpoint. And particularly when they made note that there were multiple efforts by the Russians to try to influence and try to create that collusion effort. And it was rebuffed, and it didn't happen. And so it's a huge statement. And it was a very thorough report. I mean, it cost $25 million over the last 2 years. There were 18 prosecuting attorneys. There were 40 different FBI agents. They did 500 search warrants and 2,800 subpoenas, and so the whole process went through. It was very in depth. The Democrats all along were saying, "Okay, wait for this report to come out. This is going to be the gold standard. This is going to say definitively, and we should trust this Mueller report." Well, now it's come out, and it didn't echo their false story that they were telling. They're saying, "Oh no, we can't believe that. We need to have Mueller come in and do an investigation. We need to have a hearing," which is not bad. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, Attorney General Barr said he didn't have a problem with that. But it's completely different than what Jerry Nadler did 20 years ago with the Starr report. He wanted it buried. He didn't want any of the facts out, and he just wanted to rely on the false narrative that had come through that process.
Unbelievable. Coming from the House side, which I know you've been banging your head against the wall so badly because it's so overrun by the other side of the aisle, Nancy Pelosi trying to keep her House in order, per se, both as the House in the chamber and the House as the Democrat Party, because she's, I did kind of chuckle at, it's those 5 little socialists over there causing all the ruckus, but we're really not like that. We're really trying to keep it mainstream. Is that really what's going on in the chambers right now, or is it pretty divided?
It's fairly divided, and it's not as divided as she tries to describe it. in terms of, it's just a few people.
Sure.
I mean, that really is a definition of their policies. I mean, they want to put in socialist policies. They want big government. They want government to control your life. They don't want you to have the freedom to choose, the freedom to be able to run your business, the freedom to be able to live your life.
Sure.
And even though the headlines, maybe by some freshman members of the House, Nancy Pelosi's fallen right in line and following and agreeing with all of those policies, those efforts. The problem is she knows that's not what Americans want.
Right.
And so she's trying to cover herself up and protect her other members in the House so that they can maintain the majority. And I don't know, it's not as evident, but the U.S. House of Representatives is much more dictated by the majority.
Sure.
Even much so than the Kansas House of Representatives. So basically the majority rules on everything. The majority controls a rules committee. The Rules Committee actually makes separate rules for each bill that comes out and dictates how what's debated, how long it's debated, whether there are going to be any amendments at all to the bill, whose amendments and what those amendments say are controlled by the majority. And so it really is a majority rules process, which with now the Democrats in control, it's their agenda. And the sad part is, they're not telling us what they're really planning to do.
Sure.
I mean, they've come out with a few things. Last Friday was a 100-day anniversary of them taking over control of the House.
What have we done?
And we've talked about 100 days of disappointment because they really haven't accomplished anything. They've attempted to put in place a law where they fund their own election campaigns by having the federal treasury match donations 6-1. They've put in what they called the Violence Against Women's Act, but really was just a political posturing position to be able to take handguns away from people who might have been accused, but not even convicted, just accused. And so what we tried to do is let's make sure we get a true legitimate bills passed. We try to get a clean Violence Against Women's Act passed so that we could actually protect people and make sure that there's good security. Instead, they want to do political posturing and pandering, and it's led to nothing. I mean, for the last 100 years.
Yeah, and that's the question: is what are we going to do moving forward with that for the next year? I mean, are they looking at doing another investigation for the Russian collusion? Even though this research showed that there was nothing, I saw the story of them doing a committee hearing for hate crimes and hate speech, and the whole thing that happened, and I don't see why that's the focus right now on doing these investigations, doing these hearings, doing these special committees when we're not getting anything done. I mean, we're spending a lot of money on investigations right now that aren't really benefiting the U.S.
That's right. So, I mean, it's a sad state of affairs that they'd rather go through fake investigations instead of working on good, positive legislation for the country. And what their strategy is that they can't get over President Trump won the election, so they want to disrupt his administration. They want to stop the process that we have had for 200 plus years in terms of effectively governing. And they've been fairly successful in terms of stopping positive things. We were able to get a lot of things done in the last session, but now as we look forward for the next 2 years, their plan is to have investigations in the Judiciary Committee, investigations in the Intelligence Committee, investigations in the Government Oversight Committee, and instead of focusing on some of the problems that we need to work on in terms of making sure that we keep our government going forward. The sad part is they won't take the facts as facts. I mean, once they see the facts, like the Mueller report, they say, "Oh well, we've got to go dig for something else."
Yeah, there's got to be something.
There's got to be something, and they've kind of, even though Mueller said that there was absolutely no evidence of collusion, he didn't say that there was absolutely no evidence of obstruction, because in reality, if there's no collusion, then there wasn't obstruction of justice. So a good prosecutor would say, we didn't find evidence of that because we weren't looking for that because there wasn't collusion. I mean, it's like they also didn't find evidence that he was speeding and that he ran a red light, and because they weren't looking for that.
Because they weren't looking for that, Yeah, I don't know how you can obstruct something that's not there. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's right. But it's that mindset that they've got to continue these attacks. They've got to continue these hearings and investigations, because that's the only way they can attack the president and do it in a false way and of course the fake news media is going to latch on to what they do and what they say, and the socialist mindset in the Democrat Party is going to do that over and over again.
I think they're shooting themselves in the foot when it comes to the election, which is going to be entertaining to watch. Congressman Ron Estes, we got to take a break here in just a second. We got a lot to get to. I want to talk about the emergency declaration, where we're at with that, with the funding for the border. We have the crisis at the border, the tipping point. I mean, when they come out and they say, we can't hold any more people, this is getting nuts, we need some help down here. Where do we go from there? We got some calls online we'll get to as well. Also, tax returns, people yelling, I didn't get as much of a tax return. Maybe that's because you had more money in your paycheck, but so we'll go through all that. There's a lot of stuff to get to. Congressman Ron Estes is hanging out with us here for about another 45 minutes. Your phone calls at 316-721-8255. We'll do that when we return right here on The Voice of Reason. Stay here.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser.
Welcome back into The Voice of Reason, 8 minutes to the top of the hour. Great to have you along for the ride. What's happening? Congressman Ron Estes hanging out with us here in studio, as well as the town hall continues on KQAM and The Voice of Reason. Let's go to the phones and get your questions. Line number 1. Good morning. Who's this?
Morning, this is Chuck.
Hey, good morning, sir. How are we doing?
Doing well. Feeling blessed on a Good Friday.
Hey, absolutely. Happy Good Friday to you. What's on your mind?
Well, you kind of touched on it before the break, the crisis at the border. So a couple of questions for the congressman. I read the other day that Wichita, I'm from Wichita, is actually technically a sanctuary city. And so I didn't know if you could confirm that or not. And then if it is, what, if anything, will you or can you do to prevent the president from sending asylum seekers or illegal immigrants into our city?
Great question. Yeah, what do you think?
So let's talk about the definition of sanctuary city. So there's really two different categories out there. One is there's the cities and counties that actually actively seek out. They pass legislation. They say, that it's their policy not to return illegal aliens and turn them over to the federal government in any way, shape, or form or fashion, or not to require that you even ask for citizenship. And that's the true definition of a sanctuary city.
Right.
The other issue that's developed,
which we are not.
Correct. Which we are not. Now, there are other cities like, Lawrence talks about doing some of that in Kansas. So there's legitimately some cities in Kansas that talk about that. Of course, a lot in California.
Sure.
But then the flip side of that is, because of the interaction of laws and individual rights, if the federal ICE and Customs and Border Patrol and the federal law enforcement isn't able to react in a timely enough basis to take somebody who's been arrested at the local level and take custody of them, either because of time, because of issues, because particularly during the Obama administration, they just didn't want to do it.
Sure.
I mean, they didn't want to enforce the law. Then the city ultimately have to release, because they can only hold an individual for so long,
and they can't prosecute,
and they can't prosecute him because it's not a city law. So that's been added to the definition of sanctuary cities, because cities are releasing individuals that they've arrested. But if we follow our typical custody laws, our Fourth Amendment rights in terms of being protected, that's what's happening. So we want to make sure that we have good, clear definitions of that the real intent should be, it's those cities that are saying we're going to harbor illegal individuals, and not cities that have, because the federal government has not reacted soon enough or with enough resources to support the law enforcement in that community. And, that's the situation I know Wichita and Sedgwick County have been in. Some of the other counties and cities in your listening area, Butler County is one of those that's also been classified as a sanctuary city, but it's because the federal government hasn't done its job to fill up and make sure that they have custody of these individuals that have been arrested.
Is Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter, has made that comment on the show before too. He's like, well, no, we're not a sanctuary county or anything, but we have our hands tied because we can't enforce, we can't prosecute, we can't arrest somebody because they have a taillight out, find out they're an illegal alien. We can't do anything about it. All we can do is refer that to ICE, and if they deal with it, then great. If not, our hands are tied. We can't do anything about that. So by default, does that make us a sanctuary county? I guess because there's some there, but that's not our fault.
Right. That's right. And to be fair to the local governments, the cities and counties, it's the federal government's fault that we haven't stepped up and done what we need to do. And it all goes back to, if we do the right thing on border security, we wouldn't have these second and third order effect of problems that the local governments are having to affect. And we've got to get back to border security. And I can talk about that for a long time if you want to talk about that for this segment, or whether you want to spend the next half hour.
Well, let's do that. We got about 2 minutes left before the top of the hour. So let's talk about the crisis at the border right now. Where are we at? Can President Trump do the executive order to do the funding for the wall? We need to. Are we going to get this handled? I mean, we have a breaking point at the border right now. We're releasing them into cities because we can't contain any more people.
Yeah. So, I mean, national defense is the first responsibility of the federal government. And we need to make sure we have good security. We need to know who's coming into our country. Not that we're trying to limit it, but we're trying to restrict it, make sure that there are legitimate reasons and that we know who's here. We need to make sure that we don't have the flow of drugs. I mean, that's a big piece coming through the border, too, as much or more so than individuals, as well as people that are being brought in for human trafficking and to be sex slaves within America. So we've got to do border security. When it came down to that Nancy Pelosi wasn't going to do the job that the legislative branch is supposed to do in terms of funding border security the way the experts said they needed it to, which included agents, it included additional judges, it included funding for a wall or barriers or fencing, whatever's appropriate for the terrain.
Sure.
It's not going to be a wall from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, but it's going to be where it needs to make sense in the populated areas. And so the president's perfectly within the right. I mean, that was the things that I looked at were two things. Did it meet the letter of the law, which it did, based on everything that presidents have done since Jimmy Carter?
Sure.
And was it appropriate for the situation? And looking at some of those other emergency declarations, violence in Zimbabwe and violence in Belarus after elections, certainly protecting our border was as important as some of those other things. And so I would prefer the legislative branch to do their job. Nancy Pelosi didn't want to do that. So the president's gone this route. He has the authority to move funds from some funds to other funds, which is what he's doing. He doesn't have the authority to move everything.
Sure.
But what's appropriate is what he's able to do using Homeland Security funding, as well as some national defense and military construction funding.
So we could see some stuff actually start happening down there pretty quickly.
That's right. I mean, the money's been appropriated for this year. The money's available at the president's discretion to spend. Obviously, it takes a long time to go through a big project like that.
Sure.
And granted, what they're really talking about was 55 miles of fencing.
Wow.
So it's not like it's a huge endeavor in terms of the whole border. And
the end of the world. Come on.
It doesn't make sense to have fencing the whole border. I mean, you're going to have rivers. You're going to have terrain across part of it. The other piece that was in there that's not talked about is electronic surveillance. Having a capability with infrared as well as cameras, and having drones, having tethered blimps to some degree, actually at the border, being able to track what's going on. These smugglers are insidious. What they'll do is they'll sell the right of passage to smuggle somebody in. They'll take groups of 8 or so. They'll send them in one part of the border, and they'll send a second group in another part of the border. And then when the Border Patrol goes after those, they'll sneak the drugs in a third part.
In a third place.
So they're very insidious in terms of what they're doing.
Wow, I love it. Hour number 3 of The Voice of Reason coming up. Congressman Ron Estes, we got lots more to get to. We'll cover a lot of ground coming up. Stay here.
It's time for Reason.
Conservatives are not the anti-environmentalists. We're the conservationists. We're common sense environmentalists. We love commonsensical ways to actually address these things rather than doing it in the political fashion of, hey, look at this. We shook up the system for environmentalism. We're the ones that when we hunt something, we use every bit of the animal. We like not having 3-eyed fish in the lake when we go fishing. We're the conservationists.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser.
Then I get on my knees and pray.
Is it really the third hour? Really, truly, honestly, really? Come on. Not yet. Not yet. Welcome into The Voice of Reason. It's hour number 3 of The Voice of Reason, broadcasting live out of the heart of the nation here in Wichita, Kansas on Big Talker KQAM, streaming on YouTube as well. Check out the YouTube page because, well, hey, Why not? You can watch the video. You can watch my ugly mug for whatever reason. Congressman Ron Estes hanging out in studio with us as well for another half hour, which is always a pleasure. Your phone calls on the Town Hall, 316-721-8255. This half hour of the broadcast is brought to you by Wildwood Cellars. More than just buying a bottle of wine, but you can learn the tips to find the wine that you like, not the wine that you're supposed to like, from the nationally acclaimed vineyards right here in Kansas. You can try all the different flavors, types of varieties, the sweet, the dry, the meads. It doesn't matter. Make sure to check it out. You can try it before you buy it. Wildwood Cellars, right off the Turnpike in Mulvane. Also online at wildwoodcellars.com. Here in Wichita at Maple Inn Ridge as well. It's Wildwood Cellars, and we appreciate them partnering up with us here on The Voice of Reason. Congressman Ron Estes hanging out here in studio for another half hour, and we talked a little bit about the immigration stuff and the building of the wall, because it's funny how the media is now admitting there's a crisis at the border. They were saying in the Democrats, there's no crisis, Donald Trump's lying, he's making it an issue, and it's not really an issue. Now that the border security is saying we can't contain any more people, we have to release them into the streets, they're saying, okay, now there's a crisis, but it's Donald Trump's fault.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get to that conclusion.
Well, it's because the facts don't matter to them. Yeah. I mean, they want to politically pander their position. They want to argue for whatever power they can, and they're not really interested in solving the problem. It was kind of interesting to see Cory Booker on the campaign trail for president to come out and say, oh, well, this is a terrible idea to release all these illegal immigrants into these legitimate sanctuary cities because the crime rates will go up. And all of a sudden, now he's talking about the real issues that we've been concerned about in America. Now, we're a country of immigrants. I mean, and we're going to continue to have immigration. We bring more people as legal immigrants into the country than any other country in the world. Yep. And we're going to continue to do that because America's a land of opportunity. People want to come here. They want to expand and use their skills and abilities. And we want that to happen.
Exactly.
And the problem is we need to make sure that we have the definition of who's coming in, understanding of who they are, making sure that they go through the process, making sure that everybody gets a fair shake to come in and immigrate. And we don't need people that have snuck through the border and to get ahead of the line to jump ahead of people who have taken years. Because literally the process is designed and defined to be years long.
Sure.
The founding fathers wanted it that way. In fact, Alexander Hamilton, who was an immigrant himself, wanted to have 5, 7, even up to 14 years at one point in time.
Sure. That
before somebody could become a citizen, because he knew that people needed to understand the American way of life. Instead of bringing the government, bringing the structure from their old country here, they want to make sure they understand the advantages and the positive things that we have here. So we've got to have immigration. Our system's so broken. I mean, both if you're trying to do it legally, if you're trying to come in illegally, we need to get together. We need to focus on solving those problems, making sure we want to have seasonal workers in the farming communities, in the resort areas, and we want to make sure that we have those processes at work. And unfortunately, too many people are using this for political power instead of trying to solve the problem.
I want to shift gears here just a little bit, but while we do that, let's go ahead and take a phone call as they transition here at 316-721-8255. Line number 1. Good morning. Who's this?
Morning, Andy. It's Doug.
Doug, good morning, sir. How are we doing?
Doing all right. Happy Good Friday.
Happy Good Friday to you.
Mr. Estes, I wrote you a letter on February. Well, I got a response back from you on February 25th. I live out in rural Kingman County, and I voted for you. My letter was in reference to cannabis being a Schedule 1 narcotic at the federal level. In your letter, in your response to me, you cited carbon emissions. So I guess my question is, 1, do you believe in global warming or man-made global warming? And 2, what is your stance on states' rights?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I appreciate the call, Doug. The cannabis thing really is, I guess it's appropriate for the 420 weekend coming up here. But go ahead and respond, Congressman. What do you think?
So you asked a couple good questions there. One, talking about global warming. The big government advocates have really latched onto this global warming story. Mm-hmm. They've in fact, so much to the extent that they've faked the facts. I mean, they've hid data that was legitimate out there. And so now that that's been exposed, they're trying to shift it over and change the title and the terms from global warming to climate change.
Sure.
Now, there's legitimate climate change. Back during the 70s, we were talking about, are we going to have another ice age?
Sure.
Because we had a whole lot more snow. Temperatures were a whole lot colder in the 70s than they were today. It's just the pattern of Earth. Throughout history, we've had periods of climate that warms up and cools down, and had ice ages and had warm spells.
That's what it does.
That's what it does.
Right.
And we as human beings, we don't know enough about what causes it, how that happens, and why. And there's variables in there, when sunspots happen and that. So there is a legitimate change in the climate, but it's not the global warming scare that has been out there and propagated by so many people. Al Gore trying to make money off of it and other things. So that was the first part of your question. The second part about states' rights. Our country was founded as a union of states. And there's the responsibilities and the definitions in the Constitution where there are certain rights and responsibilities given to the federal government. The rest of those were retained by the individuals and by the states. And, I'm a radical a little bit in terms of saying this, but I think we made a mistake in the country when we changed the senators from being the representatives of the states to direct election of senators. And
Sure.
The problem with that has been that now the senators are approached by the same special interests, they're approached by the same political structure, and so you end up not having the representatives of the state at the federal level. And I use as my example Medicaid.
Sure.
A program that's a federal government program, but the states have to pay 45% of it. That would have never happened if the senators were representatives of their states and representatives of making sure that the state legislators wouldn't have had to fund that 45% roughly of Medicaid costs.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned the 10th Amendment and when it comes to the states' rights and the states holding that power. And you can relay that. I mean, regardless of what people believe when it comes to the marijuana issue, a lot of people believe it should be a 10th Amendment issue going back to the states. And I believe it should be as well, too, to some degree. That's not really right now. That's kind of irrelevant, though, because right now you don't have a whole lot of say in that dog fight, do you?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest piece from a federal government standpoint is making sure that we regulate interstate commerce.
Right.
And that's a piece that we should continue to maintain. We need to make sure that there's a common set of laws across the country that affect trade, because otherwise we'll get into issues like the Balkans, issues that they have in Europe in terms of being able to trade back and forth from one state to another, being able to address whatever rules and regulations. To some degree, we're seeing some of that problem today with states like California coming up with their own labeling laws. So there's always issues out there that we have to address as, okay, how do we make it so that interstate commerce continues to happen, because that's been such a positive thing. That's a strength of our country.
Sure.
As a big country, we're able to interact together and work together, even though we're citizens of separate states.
Exactly. And that's the way we're supposed to be. I mean, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. And talking about trade for a second, let's shift gears a little bit. We got some more calls, and they lit up on that one. I don't know if that's what they want to talk about or not, but let's talk about trade for a second. NAFTA is dead, is gone. Now we have the new deal that's starting here. Where are we at with this transition? Is this going to be better moving forward? How does this all look?
Yeah. So I would have corrected you a little bit. NAFTA's not dead. NAFTA's still in effect, and it's going to be in effect until we replace it with something else.
But we are transitioning.
But we're working on the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which is an improvement in NAFTA. NAFTA is a 25-year-old agreement that was structured out. It was great for so much of America. It was great for trade within Canada and Mexico. It was great for our agriculture community. Great, good for manufacturing. There were some problems with that that some countries that weren't in NAFTA would kind of game the system and try to bring completed subassemblies and turn a couple of bolts and declare it being NAFTA products, and that's the type of stuff that the USMCA agreement is going to address. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, which one of our main focuses on trade. And, I think that one of the biggest things we can do this year in Congress is ratify the USMCA, pass the USMCA bill.
Sure.
Because what that does is it moves us forward, moves us into the 21st century. It fixes some of those problems that weren't addressed in NAFTA before. For example, Canada had some overwhelmingly beneficial things for them in the dairy arena, in the wine arena, for eggs and poultry, to help their farming get off the ground back 25 years ago.
Sure.
Well, now the world's different, and we need to make sure that that's fair. President Trump, to his credit, has put some additional pro-worker provisions into the USMCA agreement that traditional Republican may not have done and typically hasn't done. So what we're looking at now is after this week, the the International Trade Commission will present their scorecard on the USMCA agreement, which is really just a check the box things. Then the administration presents a draft to us in Congress. We'll look at it, make some recommendations back to them in terms of what they should put into the bill, and then the administration will bring the bill to us in Congress. It's very important that they get a lot of input on the front end because there is no amendments to it.
Sure.
When it comes to the House and the Senate, we have to vote it up or down. Ideally, we're pushing to get that done by this summer so that we can have the U.S. sign off and pass its bill, Canada pass their bill before their legislative ends in June, and then Mexico has introduced it and ready to move forward in their process there. So we want to make sure that all three of those happen. Trade's so important. I mean, there's nothing that's lifted people out of poverty in the world than free trade and capitalism, and there's nothing that has eliminated hunger as much as free trade and capitalism that has allowed our agriculture products to get throughout the world.
You know, the great part about all this is that, and other pundits have talked about this as well, is that if you're going to end socialism, going to end communism, you're going to end it, it's not going to be through the political means, but it's going to be through the economy. And that's how we can start infiltrating even North Korea, is through capitalist policies, allowing competition of businesses, allowing the trade to start flowing. Once that happens, they can try and regulate it all they want to, but it's kind of out of their hands because it blows up quicker than what they can actually maintain.
That's right. I mean, you see it over and over again in these socialist countries or the countries ruled by dictators that their economy fails.
Mm-hmm.
Their people suffer because of that. And over again, I mean, socialism has just proven that it's a failed concept.
Right.
And capitalism and free markets, making sure we have some regulation so that there is an equal opportunity for folks.
Sure.
And that's the basis of our country. That's the standpoint that's actually made the world better off because of that.
Exactly. Got to take a break here. 20 minutes past the hour. Great stuff, and we only have limited time left, but we got some other calls. We'll get to you as soon as we come back. Don't go anywhere at 316-721-8255. One more segment with Congressman Ron Estes right here on The Voice of Reason for a free-for-all, a good free-for-all Friday here on The Voice of Reason on KQAM.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser on the Big Talker, KQAM.
23 minutes past the hour, right here on The Voice of Reason on KQAM. Congressman Ron Estes, one more segment. We got about 5-6 minutes left with him. And again, thank you for the time. I love the time that we get to sit down and chat and that we get to do this. This is a blast.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, they don't schedule votes for 2 weeks around Easter, the week before and the week after, so that we can be in the district spending time talking about things that are going on. So it's great to have this opportunity to get here. Thank you.
I love it. It's always a great time. Anytime that you have a chance to do this, we need to do it. And now that you had the time off, you get to bring some, reason and sense back into your life, being back in Kansas, away from D.C. and the swamp up there. Because now when you go back, the next discussion is going to be, again, the immigration thing that's going to keep floating around, but it's also going to be the debt ceiling. We're going up on another end-of-the-year budget, and the debt ceiling is that we're capping at again. Are we going to raise the debt ceiling? Are we actually going to look at maybe trying to cut some spending? This is going to be a big debate again this year, and I think it's going to be divided not only Republican, Democrat, but even within Republican ranks again. Yeah,
it's really going to be a big debate. I mean, September and October are going to be some very heated, contentious times because we can't go on this direction that we're going as a country and spending now close to $1 trillion more than what we're bringing in. and when we have our appropriations discussions, we talk about $1.4 trillion. The piece of the debt that's controlled, that's discretionary,
right? Whether
it's half military and half domestic spending. What we don't talk about is those automatic spending things: the food stamps, the Medicare, the Medicaid, Social Security. Social Security and Medicare they're funded, partially funded by contributions. So we've got to figure out ways to address that.
Sure.
But unless we sit down and talk about all of these automatic spending programs, we're never going to get our budget under control. We're never going to be able to control our spending. And it's the sad state right now is the Democrats won't talk about it.
Right.
Their responsibility now was to develop a budget, and they didn't do that. And the budget's used to define your priorities and define what you want to spend money on. And they're going to pass on doing that. They've actually said they're not going to pass a budget this year, which is a sad thing that they won't step up and do their responsibility.
Don't even want to pass a budget. It's so sad. And I try and break it down because a lot of people aren't aware of this, of the difference between the discretionary spending that you actually have control over and get to debate on, and the 11, 12 different appropriations bills refer to the discretionary side. The mandatory spending, those social programs, they're on autopilot. They increase 2, 3, 4, 5% every year. You never touch them. And that's the majority of our budget right now. Social programs themselves consist of over 60% of our federal budget. When they say, the military needs a cut, that's not true. That's not the big chunk that's actually sucking us dry.
No, it's not. I mean, there's such a small amount of spending. Actually, 2/3 of the spending is set on that automatic pilot. And so, roughly about 30% of it is discretionary, and included in that is the interest on the debt, which, as you borrow more money and as interest rates go up, that piece goes up as well. So it puts squeeze on everything. Unfortunately, it's all going to come together in September because we'll have to do appropriations for 2020 fiscal year, and that's roughly the time when the debt ceiling provisions are going to run out and have to come back and review that. What I'm fearful of is that there's going to be this push for this grand super mega spending agreement, which is where all the crap gets put into, and it just inflates all the spending in the government. All these pet programs that somebody's been trying to figure out how to get past, they'll shove it into there, and they say they won't vote for it unless their pet projects in there, and that's a sad way to run our government.
It is sad. It's sad and pathetic because Congress is supposed to handle that. You guys have the power of the purse. We're supposed to deal with this and say, look, we have a budget. This is how much money we're getting in. This is what we have to spend. Now let's figure out where we're going to spend it. Not say, well, no, we'll just go $1 trillion over our budget this year. It's cool. And we won't do a budget. We'll just do an omnibus bill. So that way we can do another porculus and just spend on whatever we want to.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That it is crazy. And unfortunately, it's going to get caught up into politics. The Democrats have been monitoring or beating the drum that it was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when in reality what we're seeing is more tax revenue coming in this past year than we had the year before because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The economy's growing. Problem is spending's going up much faster. Wow. And what that's done is created a bigger deficit. And so we've got to keep moving forward. We've got to keep our economy growing because the growth in our economy is such a huge thing to help make sure that we get more tax revenue coming in to offset some of this spending.
Exactly. We got about a minute left before we're all wrapped up here, but when you go back right off the bat, what do you think is going to be the next? Is it going to be the Mueller investigation from the committee from the House, or is it going to be something substantial that we could potentially debate and discuss?
So the sad part is we're going to continue to hear Democrats talk about investigations of President Trump, and because they can't accept the fact that they lost an election, and they want to impact and they want to get in the way of him governing, instead of focusing on the problems that we need to address. For us standpoint in the Ways and Means Committee, we're going to push on the USMCA. That's going to be the biggest thing that we've got moving forward from there. We've got so many things that we need to be focusing on from a legislative standpoint. It's sad that people are actually looking at what kind of political posturing they can do instead of looking at how do we solve these problems that our country has.
It's going to be so sad. Congressman Ron Estes, I really appreciate the time. I know it's a crazy time for you. You're always going around, but we love the fact that you can sit down with an hour with us and take some phone calls and chat, and I appreciate that. We got to do it again soon.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and hope everybody has a happy Easter and a wonderful Good Friday.
Yeah, happy Easter to you, my friend. I love it. Got to take a break. Open line to you when we come back. Sorry we didn't get to all the calls for the Congressman. We can take your calls as soon as we come back after the bottom of the hour. Don't go anywhere. Wrapping up on a Friday here, a good Friday here on The Voice of Reason. Stay tuned.